Hello, my friends. I want to speak about what is happening in Texas and about what is happening in the physical land that we call Israel today. How there's a connection here, how you're going to hear so many of the deceivers, that is, those who have rejected the grace of Christ, but they speak as though they are sheep. Inwardly, they are ravenous wolves, and they mean only to lead you into the pits with them. And they're going to tell you about these red heifer prophecies, and about how it's required, and about how God is controlling it all, about how God allowed red heifers to come there so that the Jews could perform their ceremony. They say all of these things because they reject the first coming of Christ. That is why they look to Israel, the golden calf that they built with their own hands in 1948, apart from God. That is why they look at everything that's happening there and say that this is God's blessing to the world. Now, first off, understand this. Go back to pre-1948 and look at America. Then go to post-1948 and look at America. America, even unto this very day, supplies the Israeli military with more money than Israel provides its own military. Because the United States combined with the Zionist Christians in 1948 and set up their proxy nation to wage war and keep the Middle East in check so that they could control it. That was the whole purpose for the United States of America. The beast, the scarlet beast, was to have a nation that the people within America would accept as being one of their own, so that they could use that nation to spring proxy wars, and they could use God as the way to get the Christians on board with it, who are the dominant people in the land. So all of this they accomplished, all of this Satan accomplished, and did it by deception. And people unto this very day look at it as though those who bless Israel are blessed, those who cursed Israel are cursed. Look at America pre-1948 and post-1948. Do you believe we've been blessed by all that we've given to Israel? There's no other country in the world. You can combine them all, and you can multiply that number by 100 times, and you will still not get anywhere close to as much as America has blessed Israel by. And what are we reaping from that blessing? You're 76 years after that. Look at the stance of America. Do you think we've been blessed by blessing Israel? No, because the entire thing is a sham. It is a masquerade of Satan that has deceived even some of the very elect into believing this lie. And it's because the Jews rejected Christ the first time. The entirety of the Old Testament was to prepare and show and testify for the Messiah who was to come. The entirety of the Old Testament was that. And the Jews missed him 2,000 years ago because they were looking at the Old Testament. He didn't do what they thought he was going to do. The same as the Christians today are talking about the second coming of Christ, whenever they don't even believe the first coming. Thus, they're lying to you about all of these so-called signs and wonders of Satan. These are signs and wonders of the beast. But God is still in control of them all. And if you think about this, think about these Texas fires that we've seen, the second biggest right now in Texas history. When did they begin? Well, as soon as Israel began preparing the red heifer for its sacrifice. And you hear all these people on the internet, all these people on YouTube that call themselves Christians, they're saying, oh, God's in control. He's raising the red heifer because they're going to raise the third temple. And everything that they say is blasphemy, because we already have the risen third temple, Jesus Christ. He is the living temple. There is no sacrifice that is acceptable to God after him, which makes the sacrifice of a red heifer completely and utterly meaningless. You might as well go out to your backyard and sacrifice a grasshopper to the God and say, this is my sacrifice. because that means exactly the same thing as a red heifer sacrifice means. In the eyes of God, it's unacceptable. You cannot raise another third temple. Well, you can raise a building and call it the third temple, but it's not. For when the first temple was built and destroyed, and when the second temple was built, and Jesus walked into that temple, declared that that temple will fall, and the temple that is living will be buried in a tomb for 3 days and then rise. That was the final temple of God. He is the risen third temple, and you cannot kill him. He will not go away. And any other sacrifice other than what he did on the cross is unacceptable. So there cannot be another third temple of God. But they sit here and claim to you that the third temple that the Jews are going to build is because God is allowing them to build it, because he's going to come back to them and he's going to rescue them because of the works they're doing with their own hands. He's somehow going to accept that red heifer sacrifice as being a sacrifice like he did on the cross. And why do they say this? Because they don't believe Jesus was the Messiah 2,000 years ago. They masquerade as though they do, but when you really think about what they say, this is exactly what they're saying. They're saying that his sacrifice was not sufficient, once and for all was not good enough, and that apart from him, a people can build with their own hands a way back to God, just like they did with the Tower of Babel, and God will accept it, when we know that's not the case. So you see the abomination that is causing desolation in the world, and you see the signs before that desolation comes, and here's one of them. Wildfires sweeping over the land of Texas at the same time that Israel is getting prepared to sacrifice these red heifers for a third temple that they're going to build with their own hands. It's just a building. And here you see the Jerusalem Post from 2022. From Texas to Israel, red heifers needed for temple arrive. Those red heifers that they are using came from Texas. And by who? A Christian farmer raised them up, nonetheless. It's showing the blasphemy. It's showing the connection. It's showing the abomination. That those who call themselves Christians are looking to those that call themselves Jews, following and lusting after them because they have been deceived into believing that Christ meant nothing the first time he came. They don't believe what he did. They don't believe his words, and they don't believe his works. So that's why they're looking to red heifers for the time of the end. And it is the time of the end. They're right about that. They can see the weather. They look up at the sky and they see the clouds and it's going to rain. They recognize that. But just as Jesus stood in front of them 2,000 years ago, they didn't recognize him. When he comes back to rescue, to gather from the four corners of the earth, those of us who he has spread out far and wide, when the harvesters come to take us, they will see, see with their own eyes that everything that they had believed was for nothing, and that it meant nothing, and that they're entering into the great tribulations from that belief. But what will they do? What will most of them do? They will double down. They will help to build that so-called third temple with their own hands, call it holy, go there to worship, and who will they be worshiping? The Antichrist. It's all playing out right in front of your eyes, and they're calling it a holy works of God. The red heifers come from Texas. They're getting prepared to sacrifice them. Wildfires break out in Texas. War is happening in Israel, and they're looking at it as though it's a holy sign of God. It's God showing but a portion of what is to come. He's showing the desolation that is going to be brought because of what this apostate fallen people have done. And how many have they led astray by this false understanding, by this false belief, by these idols that they worship. Because these things are coming to pass as they say. That was what Jesus warned of. He said, just like Pharaoh's magicians essentially, things that they say will come to pass. Just as the Jews believed that the Messiah would come, and he did, it came to pass. But what don't they do? They don't recognize what it means. They are ever seeing but never perceiving. It's the same thing that the apostate ones are doing now. When they talk about these red heifers, when they talk about Israel, They're talking about their own judgment that is coming to them. For in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, when those of us who know the Lord are raised up out of this land and desolation comes over it, because of the pride, because of the inability to fall away from fallen traditions, because of their apostasy, their own judgment will be watching the whole thing happen and reject it. Just as the Jews 2,000 years ago rejected everything that Jesus did. They will watch everything that they're speaking about happening come to pass. And somehow they are so hardened that even when it comes to pass, they will still migrate to Israel to worship at the temple that will be built by human hands where the Antichrist will sit. They will still do that, opposed to believing that everything they were talking about, the rapture came true, the Lord came, He took people, but He didn't take us. That must not be God. That must be an alien invasion. That must be the Antichrist. They will go to war against God, believing the whole time that they're going to war against Satan. Completely opposite. What is up is down and down is up. And that is this generation's belief when it comes to physical Israel, because they cannot recognize what has actually happened. They cannot take the word, the scripture, and apply it, because God has hardened their hearts to the truth so much that they cannot see it, that they reject it, even when all of the evidence shows everything that I'm speaking of here. Because it's not me that's coming up with the idea, it's in the Word itself. And if you understand the Word, you understand the only way that you can understand that Word is if that risen third temple, if the high priest reveals it unto your mind to be able to recognize it. So thus they can tell you all about the Bible, they can quote Bible verses, they can copy-paste scriptures to you all day long and rebuke, but everything that they have learned about that Word is not the Word, because they've never known God. So they're going to tell you all about these temples, all about this third temple to come and the red heifers and how exciting it is. And you look at the evidence of the judgment of God coming to them. He's giving a foreshadowing of what comes to the abomination that causes desolation in the end. Fire, destruction. Right here's that sign, plain as day to anybody that wants to see it. They're getting ready to sacrifice the red heifers, and wildfires break out in Texas where the red heifers came from, of all places. And yet, just look right past it, because that's our idol, that's our golden calf, that's what we built, and that's what we will worship, because their hearts are hardened. They do not believe the first coming to recognize the second coming of Christ. God bless.